welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Burn Power, and I am an American living in Georgia. Actually, I've been living in Alaska for the last 22 years before moving here, so I've experienced quite a few cultural differences. And what I'm going to do today is give you 10 observations from this particular American of Georgian culture as seen from an American lens. Now, in doing this, I'm not trying to say that American culture is better or that Georgian culture is worse, or even the opposite, that Georgian culture is better and American culture is worse. These are just differences in outlook. So, let's start at the beginning. The first thing is that when you arrive in Georgia, the first thing that's going to hit you, and I did quite a bit of research, enough to impress a few people when I came here, about Georgia. And I was completely mystified when I first got here by a couple of things. Number one, the actual alphabet. Normally, when you arrive somewhere that's kind of European, you expect to see some variation on Latin. And if not, you'll see some variation on the Cyrillic alphabet, which contains a fair amount. Greek and Cyrillic contain a fair amount of words that look similar to some degree of the Latin alphabet. But no, Georgian alphabet is completely mystifying because it is not related. So you don't even have a handle. You can't say, oh, that's an A and that's a B. You just are kind of left. You have to learn some of it, and there's 33 letters, so that's difficult. That's the first thing that will hit you. Don't worry, though. There is, particularly in the places where you're likely to go as a tourist, there is enough English script, English writing actually, and Latinized versions of script to help you find your way around, because I think the Georgians realize not too many people can read their alphabet. Next, going with that is the language itself. The language itself, I've heard some people say, it's like, is it like Russian? No, not at all. It's not like anything else is the problem. I mean, that is to say, it's not in the Indo-European family group. It's not a Semitic language. It's not Indian by any means. I mean, it's just its own thing with a few other Georgian-related, they're not dialects, separate languages that you're not likely to hear. You're going to have enough trouble with Georgian. Having said that, if you know Russian, that'll help you get around. And the good news is, for people, say, under 35 or so, they tend to know English to different degrees, at least a few words, but often I've met people here who seem to know quite a bit of English. The younger they are, the more they know. So don't be afraid, particularly if it's a younger person, to just go ahead and start talking in English because you will not know the Georgian words. But you should learn a few, and I've discussed this and will continue to discuss it. So you should learn hello, gamarjoba, which literally translates into, victory to you. Then there's nachwamdis, which is goodbye, and then there's madloba. You will always be saying madloba because people will be helping you. And also, the next thing is about, point number one, the alphabet. Point number two, the language. Point number three, the names. Names here are kind of funny to me because I come from America where, a book of baby names can be this thick with just thousands of names to choose from. Now, on one level, many of the names that you hear here will sound somewhat familiar to you because Georgia is a Christian country, and as such, they have the same stock of Christian names that most Christian countries have, or Western European, or any sort of European country has. So, there are names related to people in the Bible, names related to Christian saints, this sort of thing. In fact, Georgia itself, the patron saint of Georgia is George, which in Georgian is, now the names aren't at all related. Actually, the name Georgia doesn't relate to Saint George. I discussed this in my basic facts of Georgia. Look for it there. But the truth is, if you learn just a few names in Georgia, it's amazing how many times you will be saying them. So George is Georgi here. Now, Georgi, if you learn Georgi, I'm convinced you know half the male names in Georgia. Having said that, after that, there's more variety of male names than there are female, which we'll talk about in just a second. So there is, there's David or Dato, and in fact, that's an interesting thing because there are so many names here that are similar. That is to say, they're relatively small. I mean, you can see this with women's names, a relatively small stockpile of names compared to the chaos of English. I'm convinced if you learn Mariam and Nino, you've got half the women in the country. And I'm not joking. And the reason for that is Mariam is named Mary after Jesus' mother, and Nino is Saint Nino, who was the woman who first brought Christianity to Georgia. But I'm convinced if you learn 10 names, you know almost every woman's name in Georgia. That is to say, let's see, there's Tamar and Salome and Anna and Elene, which is basically a variation on Helen, but don't say Elena, it's Elene. And then I've been run into this problem myself. Anyway, there are a handful of names. Tina is another one that you learn, and then there's probably maybe 5% of the women have some other name. So, but here's the interesting thing. I mentioned this with David Dato. Because they have so many names, they also have lots and lots of affectionate names for people. So that means that a David could be a Dato, Georgi could be Gio, but I mean, sometimes it's hard to tell because the name, like Toko and Taco, which one's the female name and which one's the male name? Well, the one that sounds like a Mexican food is actually the female name, and the one Toko is the male name. And now there's no gender rule here, it's just the abbreviation for the name itself. So that's another thing. So we've got language, alphabet, and we've got the names. Another thing I find really odd, sometimes very frustrating for me as an American, is personal space here. I would say personal space in America is, we talk about it being about an arm's length. Someone said to me the other day, it's the distance for you to punch someone. And someone has made this claim like it was like a universal truth, to which I just laughed. No, that's in America. In America, you have, that much space between you and the other people. And if someone gets in that space, they'd better well be a relative, someone you're in love with, or whatever. And people are very aware of their space in America. In France, I would say the distance is about this big. That is to say, when you're walking down the street, people still keep a bit of space, but they're closer to you. And I think in Europe in general, the sense of space is certainly a lot narrower than America. I mean, you go to places like Texas or Alaska, and the space is practically infinite between people. But then, in Georgia, there is no physical personal space. I mean, if you're in a subway car, obviously in subway cars around the world, you get crammed in. But here what's funny is, I could be in a subway car, or better yet, on a bus. Someone gets off the bus, and there's someone sitting right next to me. Now, in America, that would be immediately assigned to move to the next seat and put a space between you. Not here. That person may just stay there for the next half hour and wouldn't even think of moving. So I think that personal space, I see this all the time. Like, I'm walking down the street, and as I'm walking down the street, someone just stops right in front of me and blocks the traffic. They don't even think about anyone behind them at all. Now, what's interesting is in America, I come to realize, being in Europe for a while, that in America, we actually think 360 around ourselves. That whole space around ourselves is important for us to guard. We don't want anyone in that space. So, if someone's come really close to you, particularly women in America are really aware when a man is too close behind her. Whereas here, I never feel that at all. I could, you could be inches behind someone, less than that, and no one's going to say anything. You can bump someone, and there's not going to be anything like an apology, unless it's a serious bump. I mean, just like, jostling someone doesn't bring out, oh, excuse me. It's got to be pretty serious to bring out the apology word. The small one is if I'm trying to get out, I might say "ukatrovart," which means, could you, do you mind? Whereas the big one is "bodishi," which means sorry. And you would only say that, you'd practically have to knock someone on the ground to say that word. So personal space. In France, I've noticed that as people, like in America, as I'm walking down the street, I expect that the person in front of me will know that I'm behind them, and if they have to stop, they will move out of the way, off to the side, and wait for me to pass. If they have to stop and do something, they'll pull off to the side, let me pass by. In France, it's the other way around. The person in front of you expects that you are aware that they could stop at any time, and expects you to move around them. Here, it's pure chaos. That is to say, I don't know which side, it's not like people hold to one side or the other. Like in the UK, you've got to be on one side or the other, or people start going like, why are you in the wrong side? Here, I've been walking towards someone, and I would move over this way, and they would keep moving over this way. And I'm going like, what are you doing? Or I would move to the other way, and they would keep moving to the other way. And it was kind of like, well, I was just going to do this anyway. The space issues, this kind of strange jostling around and such, is much closer to the way people act in a family. No one apologizes in a family if they get to the restroom before someone else. It's just kind of like you have to wait your turn. So that's kind of how things are here, and I think it relates back to the clan structures and stuff like this. And in one sense, I think the Georgians all see themselves as part of one large family, and with very definite splits in the groupings of the family. So if you're Megrelian, which actually the Megrelians actually speak one of those other languages originally. A lot of them, of course, they all speak Georgian, of course, but Megrelian is a separate language. Or Swan, or if you're a Tush, or one of these other tribes, you see that as your identity first. So you start with family, clan, tribe, and then Georgian. But even Georgian is much more of a family than, say, anything in America, or even France, or the UK. So, along with the personal space issue comes the number 5. Along with the personal space issues comes number 5, traffic. On day number 1, when I got here, I realized traffic here does not work the way it does in America in any degree. Even France and Rome seem kind of normal compared to traffic here. Traffic here is just insane. And not only is traffic insane here, but it's the way people deal with the traffic. That is to say, normal Georgians walking around anywhere will walk through the middle of oncoming traffic to get somewhere. They don't think anything of it. I've seen women with like 2 children hand in hand walking through moving piles of cars without thinking anything of it. The idea that the traffic is really dangerous doesn't seem to occur to anyone. I'm sure it does, but from the American vantage point, and you realize how orderly traffic is in America, even in the places we think it not. Georgians are rather devious drivers. They tend to, like, if you're entering and there's a car coming in, he's not going to stop. He's just going to keep going, unless I have driven here. I did drive in New York City for a while, and as soon as I started driving here, I will occasionally rent a friend's car. I immediately went into New York City mode, and New York City mode goes like, no, you're not cutting in. And I just basically pull New York City on Tbilisi, and I'm fine. So, because in New York, it's kind of like, no, you're just very aggressive. But I've often thought, the Georgian driver in America would be kind of at odds, because they would get there and they think they'd pull a lot of these sneaky little tricks to get in and out of traffic. And you try that in some place like Los Angeles, some sort of long traffic jam, and you cut someone off really without thinking about it in front of you, without no signaling and stuff. The guy behind you is in like some sort of massive Ford pickup truck, and he's going to step on the gas and come right up behind you in this massive vehicle, really menacingly. And this guy could have some sort of weapon or something. So, the Georgian in America would feel just as weird as I think we would here in the chaos, because actually our driving is a lot more orderly than we understand. Okay, well, obviously this list is going on a little longer than I thought it would, and so I think what we'll do is we'll stop it here and we will continue with the second part of 10 differences between Georgian culture and American or Western European culture next time. Meanwhile, one of the things you can do to start to acclimatize yourself is to learn a few words, and one of the words you can learn is Nahuamdis, goodbye. I'll see you very soon.